There is a clip of a father and son screaming at each other on a shop floor until one of them grabs a chair and hurls it clean across the room. It has been an internet meme for years. But before it was a meme, it was a family business. And not just any business. Orange County Choppers was the most famous custom motorcycle shop on the planet, reportedly pulling in around $40 million a year, building bikes for Jay Leno and promo machines for movies like I, Robot. So how did an empire that big end up here, its headquarters gone, its founder in bankruptcy court, and the value of his stake in Orange County Choppers written down on his own paperwork to $0? Grab a seat, and preferably not one anybody's about to throw, because this whole thing starts somewhere you'd never expect. Not a motorcycle showroom, a steel yard in upstate New York. Long before there were any TV cameras, there was a guy named Paul Teutul Sr., and honestly, his life nearly ended before the famous part ever got started. He had served in the Merchant Marine, come home, bought a truck and a welder off his own father, and slowly built up a steel fabrication business in the Hudson Valley called Orange County Iron Works. Big railings, big steel beams, hard, dirty, dangerous work. And for years alongside all of it, he drank heavily. He has been about as open on this as a person can be. He once said that if drinking was an Olympic event, he would have taken home the gold medal, which is a great line, right up until you sit with it for a second. By early 1985, it had gotten bad enough that he figured he had two roads left in front of him: sober up or die. And he later admitted that when he first hit that fork, he actually chose to die. What pulled him back was a promise to his wife and a walk through the door of an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And he stuck with it. He got sober in January of 1985 and stayed that way for good. Hold on to that detail because sobriety stays a real thread through this whole family story. For Senior and later for Mikey too. Just don't take it as the tidy explanation for everything that goes wrong, because it isn't. And here's the thing about a guy who beat something as heavy as that. He needed somewhere to put all of himself, and for Senior, a lot of it went into work. The Iron Works grew into a serious operation, dozens of employees, real contracts, the kind of business that could have quietly supported the whole family for the rest of his life. But quietly supporting a family was never really the plan. So now, picture it. A sober, restless, kind of obsessive steelworker with a garage full of tools and a soft spot for choppers. You know the type of bike, the long front forks, the chrome, the whole easy rider look. He started building one in the basement of the Iron Works, just for himself, just to see if he could actually pull it off. That bike was called True Blue, and in 1999 he took it down to Daytona's Biketoberfest, one of the biggest motorcycle gatherings in the country, and showed it off. People lost their minds. And that reaction, that little jolt of wait, who on earth built this thing? That's the spark for absolutely everything that follows. Because later that same year, up in Rock Tavern, New York, he spun the bike building off into its own separate company, Orange County Choppers. But there was one thing he needed and didn't quite have yet: an artist. That artist turned out to be his own kid, Paul Teutul Jr., who everybody just called Paulie. Jr. had been running the rail shop over at the Iron Works, but the guy could see shapes inside a sheet of steel that nobody else could. He'd sketch out a gas tank or a fender freehand and then stand there bending and grinding metal until the real thing matched the drawing in his head. So Senior had the drive, the discipline, and the business sense. Junior had the eye and the hands. Put them together and they were honestly kind of unstoppable. Also, and I cannot stress this enough, kind of a nightmare, but we'll get there. The early bikes were wild, themed builds one after another: a Spider-Man bike, a bike modeled on a fighter jet, a tribute bike honoring the firefighters who died on September 11th with a piece of steel recovered from Ground Zero welded right onto it. There was even a build inspired by a military attack helicopter. And it was one of these early jet-themed machines that ended up serving as the shop's audition tape for what came next. This stuff got them onto magazine covers and into the biggest bike shows in the country, and the shop's reputation just kept climbing. There was a third Teutul floating around the place too, the youngest brother, Mikey Teutul, who mostly answered phones, swept up, and cracked jokes at everyone's expense. Mikey wasn't the craftsman, Mikey was the comic relief. And weirdly, on television, that turns out to be one of the most important jobs in the building, because this is where the whole thing goes nuclear in the best possible way. Somebody over at the Discovery Channel got a look at these guys, and you can practically see the light bulb going off. Picture the cast: a giant, tattooed, walrus-mustached dad, a long-haired son with serious artistic talent, a goofball little brother, and a shop where they somehow build insane custom machines against completely impossible deadlines. That's a show. That is so obviously a show. The pilot aired in the fall of 2002, and the full series, American Chopper, launched in the spring of 2003, and it took off almost immediately, but not entirely for the reason you'd assume. Sure, people liked watching a gleaming $50,000 motorcycle slowly come together out of a pile of raw parts. That was cool. That's what everybody thought the show was about. The bikes got people in the door. The fighting is what kept them coming back. See, Senior ran that shop floor like a drill sergeant. Deadlines, discipline, show up on time or hear about it. Junior was an artist, which meant he worked on his own clock and really did not enjoy getting screamed at in front of a camera crew. So you'd get these enormous red-in-the-face blow-ups, a father and a son going at it over a bracket or a paint color or a missed deadline, and then the cherry on top, one of them storming out of the building while Mikey just stood in the corner pulling a face. Viewers could not get enough of it. There's one legendary argument where a chair actually goes airborne, and years later the internet took that exact energy and turned the whole show into a meme format with captions slapped on it. You have almost certainly seen it, even if you've never watched a single full episode. And underneath all the yelling, there was always a real clock ticking. Almost every episode got built around some monster theme bike deadline, a corporate client or a big event that the shop had to hand a finished, running machine to, usually with about half the time any sane human being would actually need. That ticking clock was the engine. The fighting was the fuel. And the whole thing got so big that the show later jumped from Discovery over to its sister network, TLC, for its 2008 season, chasing an even bigger audience. And according to Discovery, at its peak, American Chopper was pulling in around 3.5 million viewers an episode and stood as the highest-rated original program the network had at the time. This little family welding operation from upstate New York had, more or less by accident, become one of the biggest things on all of cable television. And that, of course, is when the money showed up, and I mean it really showed up. At its peak around 2004, Orange County Choppers was reportedly doing somewhere around $40 million in gross revenue across bikes, merchandise, licensing, and the whole TV-driven machine. Now, that's a widely repeated figure rather than an audited one, so hold it a little loosely. But the growth around it was real. A shop that had started with a small handful of guys reportedly ballooned to dozens of employees in just a couple of years. Their online store was moving hundreds of orders on a busy day, and a huge chunk of that wasn't even motorcycles. It was t-shirts and hats and stickers. People wanted the logo on their chest. The logo was the real product now. Then came the corporate theme bikes, and this is where it gets genuinely funny how big it all got. Corporate clients were reportedly paying OCC anywhere from tens of thousands to well into six figures to design and build them a branded one-off motorcycle. The United States Air Force commissioned a bike themed after the F-22 fighter jet. Not a display model, a real, running, reportedly $150,000 chopper. 7-Eleven wanted one, Chrysler wanted one, even NASA got in on it. And then there were the celebrities. OCC built a personal bike for Jay Leno, cranked out a wild futuristic machine to promote the Will Smith movie I, Robot, and did builds tied to names like Lance Armstrong and Billy Joel. Pro sports teams were ordering custom bikes. For a few years there, the OCC logo was genuinely everywhere. And every single one of those corporate bikes doubled as rolling advertising, both for the company that paid for it and for OCC itself. Which is honestly a slick little trick when you think about it. Getting paid six figures to build somebody a billboard on wheels that also happens to promote you. On top of all that, the Teutuls themselves had become real, stop-you-on-the-street celebrities. That giant mustache became one of the most recognizable faces on cable. Grown men were getting the shop's logo tattooed on their bodies. This wasn't a motorcycle company anymore. It was a full-blown pop culture phenomenon. So take a second and think about where Senior's head has to be at right about now. 2 decades earlier, he was literally deciding whether or not to keep living. Now he's a household name with a hit TV show, a merchandise empire, and a client list stuffed with A-list celebrities. If you're standing in his boots, flush with all that success, what do you go and do? You build yourself a monument, obviously. In 2008, OCC opened up a brand new headquarters in Newburgh, New York. And this was not a garage. This was a roughly 61,000 square foot cathedral to motorcycles, reportedly costing somewhere in the neighborhood of $12 million, complete with a showroom, a cafe, a retail store, the whole 9 yards. The plan was that fans would drive in from all over the country to tour the shop, buy the merch, and watch the bikes get built in person. It was the physical, walk-through-it proof that the Teutuls had officially made it. And right around this same stretch, Senior did something that felt incredibly generous at the time and turns into a live grenade a couple years down the road. He gave Junior a 20% ownership stake in the company, a dad handing his son a real valuable piece of the empire they'd built side by side. Sweet, right? Remember that number, 20%. It's about to become the most expensive 20% in the history of reality TV. Because here's what nobody standing in that shiny new building wanted to say out loud back in 2008. Two things were quietly happening at the exact same time. The father and son who ran the entire operation could barely stand to be in the same room anymore. And the whole American economy was about to drive straight off a cliff. The screaming matches on the show were completely real, but off camera the relationship was even worse. And in September of 2008, it finally snapped in half. Senior fired Junior from Orange County Choppers. Just let that one sit for a second. The company is literally called Orange County Choppers. And the shop's chief designer, the guy whose builds had been central to putting OCC on all those magazine covers in the first place, is the boss's own son. And the boss fired him. The episode where it all comes spilling out aired the following spring, and it is genuinely uncomfortable to watch. This clearly was not some stunt cooked up for ratings. Two people who obviously still loved each other had simply run all the way out of ways to work together. But Junior didn't just quietly disappear. He still had that 20% stake, remember? He was still a part owner of the very company that had just thrown him out the door. And that little ownership detail is exactly where a painful family fight curdles into a full-blown court case. Here's how it played out, and it's kind of ruthless. After the firing, the two sides signed an agreement that handed Senior an option to buy out Junior's shares at fair market value. Fine. Sounds reasonable enough. Except then Sr. brought in an appraiser who came back with a valuation of Jr.'s 20% that I really want you to hear clearly. $0. Zero. A real functioning slice of a company this famous, suddenly and conveniently valued at absolutely nothing, which, if it held up, would let Sr. scoop those shares back for basically free. Jr. was not about to swallow that, so he pushed back hard. Sr. sued to force the buyout through. Jr. turned around and countersued, accusing his own father of mismanaging the company and draining its value. Father versus son, in a courtroom, fighting over the business they'd built together with their bare hands. And the case even came with the perfect title, Teutul versus Teutul. It went to New York's appellate division, and in December of 2010, that court came down on Jr.'s side. But here's the part people usually get wrong. The court didn't rule that Jr.'s shares were worth more than zero, and it didn't put a price on them at all. What it actually said was that the whole buyout option was unenforceable because the agreement had left the most important piece, the exact method for setting fair market value, to be worked out later. In plain English, they'd basically made an agreement to agree, and the court doesn't treat that as a real binding deal. So the mechanism Sr. was trying to use to grab the shares just fell apart. The two of them eventually settled the whole thing the following year, with Sr. buying out Jr.'s stake for an amount they kept private. Jr. walked and went off to start his own shop, Paul Jr. Designs. Although here's a little detail I genuinely love. For the first stretch after leaving, a non-compete agreement actually kept him from building motorcycles for about a year. So one of the most gifted custom bike builders in the entire country spent a chunk of that time designing stuff like a dog park, a grill, and a line of dog toys just to keep himself busy and the lights on. And Discovery, being a network that would never in a million years let a perfectly good family feud go to waste, literally built an entire spin-off around the fallout. They called it American Chopper, Sr. versus Jr., and it pitted the two rival shops directly against each other. When that eventually ran its course, there was even another OCC series after it. They squeezed that feud for absolutely everything it had left. And real quick, if you're the kind of person who loves watching an empire eat itself alive from the inside, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because this channel basically runs on stories exactly like this one. All right, back to the wreckage. But you can only sell an audience on a family ripping itself apart for so long before something else in the machine gives out. And something else was already giving out. The money. Think for a second about what OCC actually sold. Custom motorcycles that cost about as much as a car, and corporate theme bikes that cost about as much as a house. Those are the very first things people cross off the list when the economy tanks. And that $12 million palace up in Newburgh had opened its doors right as the 2008 financial crisis came crashing down. So now there's this enormous, wildly expensive building designed for a flood of fans and deep-pocketed corporate clients, sitting there at the exact moment nobody on earth is dropping big money on a chromed-out show bike. Then the show's ratings started to cool off. The novelty wore thin, the constant fighting got exhausting instead of entertaining, and the various versions of American Chopper eventually wound down and wrapped up. And once the cameras were gone, so was the main reason for a total stranger to drive across 3 states just to walk around a motorcycle showroom. And that's the quiet, brutal logic underneath this entire collapse, and it's bigger than just one family fight. Television was the flywheel that spun almost every other part of the business. The merchandise, the tourism, the corporate commissions, the personal appearances, the licensing, it all fed off the same source of energy, which was public attention. So when the show's momentum finally started to slow, all of those revenue streams got harder to sustain at the enormous scale OCC had built for. Pile on a brutal recession that gutted spending on luxury toys, a giant headquarters loaded with fixed costs, and a custom chopper craze that was already cooling off, and you've got a business under pressure from about 5 directions at once. The feud was real, and it hurt. But it was only one of the forces dragging the whole thing down. The numbers turned brutal fast. OCC couldn't keep up with the payments on that giant headquarters, and around 2011 the company ended up handing the whole building over to its lender, and then leasing back about 2/3 of it. In other words, they no longer owned their own monument, and now they were paying rent just to keep working inside it. The building later sold off entirely. A Dallas company picked it up, and it eventually changed hands for a little over $2 million. A place that had reportedly cost somewhere around $12 million to build, gone for a fraction of that. And then it got even more personal than the company. Now, to be clear about what actually happened here, because this part gets mangled constantly, the main Orange County Choppers company did not file for bankruptcy. But a smaller OCC merchandising business had gone under back in 2013, filing Chapter 7 with more debts than assets. And then, in February of 2018, Paul Sr. himself, the man who dreamed and welded all of this into existence, filed personal bankruptcy. Specifically Chapter 13, which is a court-supervised plan to reorganize and pay down your debts, not a liquidation where everything gets sold off and shut down. And the timing on it is almost too perfect to be real. He filed those papers on February 27th, and just days later, Discovery aired a big American Chopper comeback preview. Cameras rolling on the triumphant return in one room, fresh bankruptcy paperwork drying in the other. And here's the detail that genuinely stops you in your tracks. In those personal filings, Sr. had to list what his ownership stake in Orange County Choppers was worth, and the number he put down was $0. Zero. Now that does not mean a judge banged a gavel and declared Orange County Choppers officially worthless. It was Sr.'s own declared value for his stake on his own bankruptcy schedules. But the symmetry is impossible to miss. That same zero he'd once tried to pin on his son's shares had come all the way back around and landed on his own piece of the empire. And to make his repayment plan work, the next year he sold off his big estate, the sprawling property, for around $1.5 million. So there's your fall, a business once reported to pull in tens of millions a year with its founder's own stake in it now written down to zero. A $12 million headquarters, gone. A family split apart in a courtroom, which leaves the one question that actually matters here. What happens to a father and a son after all of that? Now, you'd forgive these two for never speaking again after all that. A firing, a lawsuit, a company reduced to zero, years of very public, very ugly laundry aired on national television. That's the kind of damage that usually doesn't heal. But here's the part I honestly did not see coming. They found their way back to each other, sort of. By 2018, Discovery brought American Chopper back, and their damaged relationship became one of the biggest storylines of the revival. And on camera, they actually did sit down and start talking more openly about the distance between them, the conversation that had been years in the making. It's genuinely emotional. After all the screaming, the lawsuit, and the long stretches of silence, watching these two hard-headed men take real steps back toward each other really does land. But, and this is such a perfectly Teutul way to end things, they made their peace as a father and a son, and then basically agreed that they should probably never actually work together again. They did do one more collaborative build a couple years later, for a 2020 special actually titled American Chopper: The Last Ride, and by most accounts, including Sr.'s own, it did not exactly go smoothly. He admitted afterward that he hadn't even really wanted to do the build, because he was scared it would damage the relationship all over again. So in the end, they didn't fix things by building one more bike together. They fixed things by deciding wisely to stay out of each other's workshops for good. So where does all of this actually stand today? Because OCC didn't die exactly, it moved. The Newburgh operation wound down around 2020 during the pandemic, but Sr. packed the entire brand up and hauled it south, and in 2021, Orange County Choppers reopened in Pinellas Park, Florida, in the Tampa Bay area, as the OCC Roadhouse and Museum, and this isn't just a restaurant with some old bikes bolted to the wall. It's a genuine hybrid. A custom bike shop, a museum, a restaurant, a live event venue, a retail store, and a full-on nostalgia destination, all in one. Sr. even had a working shop built on the property so he could keep actually building motorcycles. And people show up. Turns out the story still sells. Sr., for his part, is still very much around and still building. In fact, OCC roared back onto television in early 2026 with a brand new series called Orange County Choppers Original. The man simply does not know how to quit. Junior runs Paul Jr. Designs, where he's built some genuinely incredible machines over the years, including bikes themed around massive video games and blockbuster movies, and he wrote a whole book about the journey called The Build. And Mikey, who'd stepped back from the chaos years ago to focus on his sobriety and his own creative projects, including his artwork, has actually turned up alongside Sr. in that new 2026 show. The band sort of back together. And when you finally zoom all the way out on the whole saga, here's the thing to hold on to. The feud did not destroy Orange County Choppers all by itself. That's the tidy version, and it's too simple. The truth is that the same father-son tension that made millions of people tune in every single week is also what broke apart the creative partnership at the very center of the brand. And then that crack met a brutal recession, an enormous headquarters full of fixed costs, a custom bike craze that was already fading, and a TV audience that eventually moved on. Stack all of that up, and an empire that once looked untouchable suddenly got very, very hard to hold together. But notice what didn't happen. OCC didn't actually disappear. The company itself is still going, down in Florida, still building bikes. It was really just that first TV famous version of the empire, the one that ruled cable television, that didn't make it through in one piece. They built a legend out of a relationship that couldn't quite survive being that famous. And honestly, the fact that these two still managed to find their way back to just being a father and a son at the end of all of it might be the single most impressive thing they ever built together. If you want more empires that got torched from the inside by the very people who built them, I've got a whole garage full of them for you sitting right over here.